Welcome to the May the 18th, 1999 taping of It Happened in Grand Prairie, as we bring you the history of our city and some of the important people that have made that history. And, by the way, they're continuing to make history for us this very day. And we're so pleased to do a continuing but another segment of our salute to the Grand Prairie Junior High / Lee Middle School's 50th anniversary. And we're very pleased today, and this is our history tape number 367. And we have three illustrious past teachers that are going to help us continue to document that history. And we're so pleased, first of all, to welcome Lois Miller. Lois, welcome to the set, my dear.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Oh, and we're so glad to have you. We're glad we have you as our captive audience right up here on the set. And Lucille Roundtree, this is your second or third trip to the set, but we're glad to welcome you today. And a lady of much stature, with a husband that had much stature as far as history is concerned, Mary Kate Vail, the wife of our late Marvin Vail. We want to welcome you to the set, my dear. So glad to have you with us, and it's really great to have three wonderful ladies that have been so important to the history of Grand Prairie, and especially to Grand Prairie, what we called junior high. Then it was a Grand Prairie maybe middle school, and then Lee Middle School and Lee Junior High, all of the different names that you all have, some of you have worked under. And with your permission, the other two ladies, I'm going to begin with Lois. And Lois Miller, would you look out into your camera and let us know about Lois? And Lois lost her husband several years ago.
Easter 1992.
Easter 1992, you remember the date. And we'd like for you to tell us a little bit about your history at the Grand Prairie Junior High at that time. When you came there, what you taught, and just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, when I came over to see about a job, Mr. Roberts, the superintendent, said, we have places in junior high, we have them in high school, we have them in elementary school for mathematics. And I thought, well, I believe I'll just try junior high school and see how that goes. So I had 7th grade mathematics. Back there then we called it arithmetic, but shortly after that it became known as just mathematics.
Yes.
It was a very pleasant experience, a pleasant year to be there. Many new things were happening since it was a brand new school. And it was just lovely to be there. We had to share our auditorium and cafeteria with Crockett Elementary School because that was between us.
Yes.
And so we did that. Well, we were still doing that when I left there and went over to Jefferson.
And what year did you leave that school to go to Jefferson? Do you remember that?
I believe it was the fall of 1955.
1955. How many years then did you teach at Lee? Couple? Excuse me, at Grand Prairie Junior High?
7.
7 years. 7 years at GP Middle School. And then in 1955 to Jefferson. Was that a brand new school then?
Yes.
All right. Leaving Grand Prairie Junior High, you left some mighty fine folks. Who were the other math teachers or some of the other people, and who was your principal?
The principal the first year there at the Grand Prairie Junior High School was Mr. Wood, John Wood. His wife was the curriculum director for both junior high school and high school.
Do you remember her name?
I cannot think of her first name.
Okay, all right, that's all right. And then the second principal, that was the first year, and then who followed as principal after that?
All right, Mr. Lindsay, and I don't even remember his first name.
That's all right, and Mr. Lindsay was
he had red hair.
Second year and is a redhead. Okay,
yeah.
All right. So you served under at least 2 principals at Grand Prairie Middle School, right?
Oh, more than that.
Oh, okay, all right.
After Mr. Lindsay, then we had Mr. Bowes, Lloyd Bowes.
All right.
who was a very good principal. It
All
wasn't
right.
long until he went to high school.
All right.
And Mr. Holly,
All right.
Tom Holly then was our principal.
All right.
And Mr. Hendricks was assistant.
Okay.
And then when Jefferson was ready, we went over there with Mr. Holly.
With Mr. Holly.
And
you
Mr.
followed him
Hendricks
on
stayed
over.
there.
And Hendricks stayed then as the principal at Green Prairie Junior
Junior
High.
high school.
Oh, that was wonderful.
Yes. And do you know that we had the students write the headings on their paper? They had to write their name, subject, school, and date. And they had to write up there Grand Prairie Junior High School, and were not allowed to use any abbreviations.
Oh, my, my.
They had to write all that out. But
Make
they
it
didn't
just-
complain too much.
Exacting, wasn't it?
Right.
Was there another math teacher that you remember that you all, you had just one math teacher, or were there more?
Well, for seventh graders,
Okay.
I was the only one that first year. The next year, there had to be a new section added.
Uh-huh.
So they usually used the coaches to do things like that. So John Hill,
All right, that's another name we need to mention in there, John Hill, the late John Hill, and
right,
yeah, that is wonderful.
he taught then. I might say that we really enjoyed everything because we were still a small school, but we had classes that were large. My homeroom that first year had 36 students, and in some of my classes I had 40. In fact, I taught all of the seventh graders in Grand Prairie that year,
In the whole city.
in the whole
In
city.
the whole city.
Right.
That was significant. We're going to get back to you in a few minutes if we have any more time, but let's get on down here to Miss Lucille. Lucille, how about your experiences at Grand Prairie Junior High?
Well, I was lucky. I had the faculty was so welcoming, and such wonderful people, and we had a great family feeling. And I'll tell you, Jean Rowe was great. Once we had little parties, and she was always the backbone of it. And we had such a nice time. You know, that made family feeling, I guess.
And what did you teach? What
Language arts
language arts?
and some Texas history.
And what grades?
7, and I had a few classes in 8, you know. But I had Mr. Hendricks and Ray Fuller, and those were the only 2 principals. And when Mr. Hendricks retired, well, Ray Fuller was there 11 years, and then he went over to Lamar for 4 years, and then he came back to Lee for 11 more years. So those were the only 2 principals that I had, and I was over there 20 years. And I had some wonderful people up on that 2nd floor. I was on the 2nd floor the whole time. And
That meant climbing stairs, didn't it?
yes, but that was, you know, I was younger then, I didn't mind, I guess.
Yes.
And we had, bomb threats aren't new. One winter we had a lot of bomb threats, and invariably it was a very cold day. You couldn't possibly get to go get your jacket, so we'd go out on the blacktop and just freeze to death
While they
the
checked it out.
police checked the lockers.
Oh,
it was
my.
cold. Do you remember?
And this was many long years ago.
Oh yes, people act like it's brand new, but they thought of it some time ago.
Oh, yes.
And well, what do you remember most? I talked to Weta Smith about Lee, and she had a funny one about Mr. Bowe. She said that the photographer had been there, and over the intercom said, send anybody down that hadn't had their picture made. So just as one person, the class she was in rose, and they all started for the door. The teacher was inexperienced, and she said, oh, all of you? But she let them go, and they got out to the head of the stairs, and they looked down, and there was Lloyd Bowes. And the man has eyes in the back of his head. How did he know? They just turned around, went right back where they came
He
from.
had caught him in the act, didn't he? Oh, that was.
And
Weta, of course, is married to Carlisle Smith Jr., and did he attend school there also?
yes, he did. They did not, were not free sweethearts there, but they did both attend there. And Jack Baker and Barbara, I believe, both attended there. And I was trying to think of some other people, but I couldn't. I'm sure there are many.
Well, Carlisle was our former state representative, so he has advanced quite successfully in his architectural business and being a state representative too.
That's right.
Is there any other class person that you taught that has become famous in our city or otherwise?
Well, I'm sure there are. I'm just right this minute, I'm not thinking who they are.
Did you have Chuck? Did you have Chuck?
Chuck Dell?
Chuck Dell?
Yes.
All right,
No,
Chuck
I
Dell, one of our
Yes.
famous doctors here in the city.
I go
Dr.
to him.
Chuck Dell.
Charles
Okay. Yes, and Charles England, mayor of Grand Prairie.
Oh, yeah, and his wife went there too.
Oh,
I believe they were sweethearts
Denise,
there.
they probably were. Well, let's get on down the way here to Mary Kate. Mary Kate Vale, would you look out into your camera and tell us about your experiences at Grand Prairie Junior High?
Well, when I came after Joe Hendricks became principal.
Do you remember the year you came there?
I think it was 53.
All right.
And I had come from Internal Revenue.
All right.
And there we had cafeteria, and we got to eat whatever we wanted and pay for whatever we bought. And I wasn't at the orientation. I didn't know the rules and regulations and everything about the school. And so I went in the cafeteria the first day, and the first day I went in, I got my hand slapped.
Oh, my. Oh.
And so I had picked up an extra thing of ketchup. And I said, well, can't I pay for it? No. No, you cannot. So, and then I had my homeroom there because we didn't have enough rooms, and I had to go across the street to what was known as Old South Side.
Oh, yes.
And we had 4 teachers over there, Lois and Helen Sauls and Mrs. Peterson and Johnny Hill and myself. And I had the room when each of them had their conference period. And I had my homeroom in the cafeteria. And then it was about mid-morning, wasn't it? 9 or 9:30 or 10, something. I'd come back on the days that we were having fish, and the kids would say, we're going to have fish today.
They knew their homeroom was nearby.
Because I smell like fish. I have to have a homeroom there.
And what did you teach?
Social studies,
Social studies?
geography, and government, and
7th
history.
grade?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I finally, when I retired, or when after so many years, I got a room. Well, I was upstairs with Roundtree and Don Little and Ann Ziegler, and we all had a lot of fun. We congregate in the hall between classes. Burkeen, Miss Burkeen, Miss Circle.
Phoebe.
Keep naming the ones that you worked with.
Phoebe Gibson and Mrs. Circle.
All right.
And Miss Circle is still living.
98 years old.
98.
I thought she was 100.
No.
Not yet, I believe.
Well, someone told me that she was. But anyway, we just had, and Mr. Stark,
Okay.
and
Mr. Hendricks was your principal when you left there? And what year did you retire?
I retired in, I looked on this paper 79, but I thought it was 80. What I mean, it was the beginning of 80 that I
Okay.
retired.
Okay.
And no, I guess Ray Fuller was the principal.
Ray Fuller was a
when I
principal then.
retired.
Okay. And I know that y'all have been enjoying yourself since your retirement. And all 3 of you all, did you get to go to the reception that was at Lee the other day?
Yeah.
Yeah. Ms. Miller didn't get to go, but I have pictures of the 2 of you that were there, and we're going to try to, if we do another segment of this with the men that were at Grand Prairie Junior High, we're going to try to get those pictures, get Mr. Louis Tovar to transpose those onto film, and maybe we can have a good show and tell. I want to thank y'all very much for coming to give us just a few moments of your time to tell about the school that was so important that finally became Lee Middle School now, and they're celebrating that wonderful 50th. And I want to thank y'all for being here.
Thank you, and I'm sorry I forgot to tell about the Golden Bears.
Oh, we'll let you in on the next segment maybe. Thank you. And we'll be right back with the rest of our history on Lee Middle School and Grand Prairie Junior High.
I'm Sheriff Buford Gibbons.
I'm Deputy Doug Diggins.
And we're the Road Rangers, and this right here's what makes my blood boil.
You know what this is?
This is stuff what blowed out of some danged old pickup truck. Yeah, that's where most of this stuff comes from.
So the next time you put something in the back of your truck what could blow out of it, just remember,
The Road Rangers are waiting on you. That's real good, Deputy.
thank you.
As we continue our interview relating to the 50th anniversary of Grand Prairie Junior High and now Lee Middle School, we're very pleased to bring two wonderful teachers, or ex-teachers, to help us document a little bit more about that wonderful, wonderful institution. And we're very pleased to introduce at this time Mrs. Jean Rowe. Jean, welcome to the set.
Thank you.
And we're glad that you brought Verlin with you and that he's in the studio audience to aid and abet you. Isn't that great?
At least drive me home.
At least to drive you home. That's great. And Francis Smith, we're so glad to have you with us today. And we're sorry that Lester passed away a couple of years ago, but we know that you have been a stalwart citizen here in Grand Prairie as well as a retired teacher. And Jean Rowe, with your permission, I think I'm going to interview Francis first. Is that okay?
That's fine.
You're going to vote for that, aren't you?
I'm going to vote for that.
Okay. Francis, would you look out into your camera and let us know about your tenure at what was then the Grand Prairie Junior High, or Lee, or whatever it was named at that time, and tell us the years you were there and your tenure.
Okay, I came to Grand Prairie in '69. I had written a letter to tell the school that I taught special ed, and the next thing I heard was, "Come quick, we've got a space for you." I was here from '69 to, I moved in '74 to high school. I taught special ed, and it was like the old-fashioned schoolhouse, you know, where you teach everything. And I had all sorts of ages, I guess 6th, 7th, and 8th, 9th, in that, or I guess it would be 7th, 8th, and 9th in that room. I taught everything.
Yes.
Whatever it was I wanted to teach, that's what I taught. I even taught PE until one day Lloyd Bowes saw me teaching baseball out front and said, "Let's get those kids in PE classes."
Yes. In special ed, did you have a special setup that you created for that work?
Well, when I came, the kids studied whatever the teacher's specialty was.
Yes.
And I felt like they ought to have a complete curriculum, a little bit of everything. So I rearranged it that way. And they really didn't care what, they really wanted me just to keep schedules, you know.
Yes.
And so I taught a little bit of science and history and math and English and everything. But a lot of my time there, I was trying to promote, I had the oldest group in Grand Prairie. When the students left me, they went to work.
Yes.
And I felt like I had a particular class I felt real strongly that needed to go to high school. So I worked with the teachers and with Hobbs Williams and anybody else that was influential about letting us go to high school and have a program there.
Yes. For the special education kids.
Special ed program. Of course, we had to meet in the teacher workroom, but we did get to move a class to high school. And that was beginning because some of those kids graduated.
That is wonderful.
Yeah.
And you felt like that you had molded their lives, keeping them that long and taking them through the extra
Well, they were
steps.
too young to go to work.
Yes.
And some of these, well, one was a dental hygienist, and I don't really remember what the others made.
Who were the principals? You said that Joe Hendricks was the principal?
No, I never had Hendricks. I had Ray Fuller the whole time.
Ray Fuller was it, okay.
Uh-huh.
All right.
But see, that's just 5 years, so.
But 5 years with special education kids and doing all of the planning that you had to do and to make a well-rounded student, that was a
It
challenge.
was fun. We had this librarian who furnished me with materials.
Oh.
And
Because
really
of
helped.
her. Because of her, many things happened. We're going to interview that librarian next, aren't we?
yes.
Is there anything else you'd like to say about the school before we leave and go?
I had a lot of fun. There was a lot of camaraderie in that building.
You got a lot of support, didn't you?
Yes, a lot of support. The teachers were all very supportive of the classes.
Yes, that's wonderful. Well, we want to thank you for the time that you spent with some of our kids. I had one daughter to go to Grand Prairie Junior High for 1 year before Jefferson, and so I feel a real kinship to that. But now, Jean Rowe, librarian of the world at Lee and Grand Prairie Junior High, it's your time next. Tell us about you.
Well, I guess it begins with the beginning of the library at Grand Prairie Junior High School. About the time that Lee was built, we had come to Texas from Illinois, and I was involved in starting a church library at the First Baptist Church in in Arlington. And I did the people stuff. I talked to people about what they were reading. I shelved the books. I did the date dues. And the technical work, the perfect work, was done by a lady who was a professional librarian, and her name was Mabel Cobb. She had waited at Grand Prairie High School as a Spanish teacher for this job to set up this library. Believe me, it was set up perfect. She was a perfectionist, and she was a book person. And even after 14 years of that library being shuffled in and out and 1,300 kids in that building, when I took inventory the first year, there were absolutely no mistakes in the bookkeeping in that library. Because she found out that I had had college, but I was not certified to teach in Texas, she kept needling me to go to TWU, to library school. And in fact, she even got me a ride one time, because I didn't drive a car, to go to TWU. But the lady that she got the ride for me didn't like me. And so she wouldn't take me to TWU. So I found a group of boys that were going to North Texas that would willing for me to either furnish the car a week or pay them to go to North Texas. So I went to North Texas, and not only did I have to do student teaching to be certified to teach in Texas, then I had to do a library degree. So I kept at it, and in fall semester 1956, I did my student teaching at Jefferson in math with Hobbs Williams and Johnny Hill. And then I went back and finished my library degree. And in 1960, the Grand Prairie Independent School District passed a rule that you had to live within the bounds of Grand Prairie to teach in Grand Prairie. Well, Mabel had just built a dream house in Arlington, and she wasn't about to give it up to move to Grand Prairie. So she started giving little hints and talking to Mr. Hendricks even before Christmas that year about she knew somebody that ought to have that job. And she kept on, and even though they hired somebody else to take the job and everything, it got down to the day before school started. And Mr. Chambers called me, and he said, I've assigned you to teach 4th grade at Houston Elementary School, because I had worked hard on this certification, but I'd never taught 4th grade. And he said, but we've hired a little girl from Arkansas that has never been a librarian. If you can call her and talk her into trading assignments with you, I'll give you the library at Lee. Well, I called that little girl, and she just cried and cried and cried. She was so thrilled, and she taught out at Houston Elementary about 3 or 4 years. She could do musical programs, she could sing and dance, and do all these things that I couldn't do, and they just loved her. So the first year that I taught at Lee, on the attendance records and everything, I was Sherry Stone. But I stayed. I liked it.
What year?
That was 1960.
1960.
Now, I said that Mabel was a book person. She was a library specialist. By the time I got to be a librarian, we had shifted and we had projectors and film strips and record players and eventually televisions and video recorders and even video cameras. And by the time I retired, I got the library ready for the computer. So now Barbara McNally, that's the librarian now, she's really, I think the educationally correct word is information specialist.
All right.
So Mabel was the librarian, and I was the media specialist, and now Barbara is the information specialist.
All right. How many years was that when, how many years were you librarian at Lee?
27, a third of my life.
27 years. Okay. And did you ever do any other teaching other than be librarian?
I was in Dallas for 3 years, and the library in the school that I was in was a part-time thing. I had to teach several classes, mostly 6th and 7th grade science.
How about some of the people, some of the teachers, your principals? You want to name drop on this? And we have about 2 minutes left on our
2 minutes.
interview.
Well, two things I wanted to say. The only student that we know of that went to Lee that lost his life in Vietnam was a little boy named Gary Lee. And when I was in Washington in 1990, I had a rubbing made of his name. And I took it back to Mr. Gilbert at the school, but I don't know what happened to it. But I guess that's the last thing I have time to tell.
Mr. Gilbert was the principal. Wasn't he a student there at one time?
That's what I was going to tell you. The first year I was at Lee, Gary Gilbert was in the 9th grade. He was the president of the student council and the captain of the football team. And the last 2 years I taught at Lee, he was the principal. And when I retired, now gosh, I don't know whether it was Debbie Roper Knight or Marilyn Neely, but anyway, the girl that gave me the presentation of my retirement certificate was a girl on the school board that had gone to Lee.
Gone to Lee.
And while we're talking about that, also Judy Moon Johnson was a former school board member, and her mother was Mrs. PTA.
Winnie Moon.
At Lee, and her and Frances Williams really held that building together, I think, for 20 years in the PTA.
Yes, yes, they did.
And
we have a half minute left.
half a minute. Well,
in half a minute, you better tell something about the Golden Bears, or we're going to
Well, I don't know anything about the Golden Bears.
All right.
Except we had T-shirts.
T-shirts about the Golden Bear. All right.
And
We had those little books.
but they laughed about the reason that we had the good parties a lot was that we had the parties in the library after they built the big room downstairs. It was sort of a multi-purpose room, and we did have some fun parties.
Well, I want to thank you all for all the contributions you've made, just as the other ladies that were on the dais before you. Y'all are precious to have shared that with us, and I'm glad that you all got to go over to the anniversary reception the other day, and I was glad to see you there. And that prompted this interview, and we just are so pleased that you helped us document. And would you all help us close the show? This is Ruthie Jackson reminding you that history is as we live and do.